All right.
This is Jack Spillane from the New Bedford Light, and I'm here with City Councilor-elect Shane Burgo. Congratulations, Shane, on your recent election to the council.
Thank you.
And we're going to talk a little bit today about some of the goals Shane has for when he gets on the council, and some of the things that he'd like to accomplish. So let me start by asking you, Shane, what is your highest priority?
That's a really good question. One of the things, for me, I think was very challenging was, if I'm being honest, I didn't think I was going to win. So when I get asked that question is, well, now that you've won, what are you going to do now? So it's very easy to highlight, here's what our campaign priorities were or are. But now that we've won, the campaign's over. Now the real work begins. So I think we're going to still stay true to our campaign priorities, which were focused around the opioid crisis and affordable housing, gentrification, and the biggest one, constituent services and government transparency. But I think all of those things tie around. I think the biggest one, would be affordable housing. So we're looking at that, especially now with South Coast Rail coming to a completion finally in 2023. We're already in a very bad housing crisis here in New Bedford, and we have been for a very long time. I highlighted on the campaign trail that even back when I was in middle school, one of the face of homelessness I had mentioned was the high schooler or the middle schooler. And that's still the story here in New Bedford, unfortunately. So housing, I think, is going to be my primary focus once I'm sworn in January.
So for those of you who may not know, Shane is 31 years old?
28.
28 years old. My bad.
Yeah.
My math is not my strong point. So Shane is 28 years old. He works with the Department of Transitional Assistance in Boston. He's a
Yes.
Cape Verdean American and born and bred in New Bedford. You talked a lot about your personal story during the campaign, some of the struggles family members have had. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it relates to the issues that are important to you?
Yeah, so I talked often a lot about how my story is not unique here in New Bedford, which again is very unfortunate. Both of my parents, unfortunately, were involved in drug addiction, and they both lost their battle with drug addiction. They both, due to their drug use, contracted HIV/AIDS. And passed away, my mother when I was 11, and my father a few years after that. And then I was raised by my maternal grandmother, really my maternal grandparents. My grandfather passed, when I was in middle school. So then my grandmother did the heavy lifting after that. So for me, when we talk about the opioid crisis or drug addiction or addiction in general, it really does hit home for me and many other youth here in New Bedford. And then on top of that, being raised by my grandmother, struggling to make ends meet is, again, not a unique story here in New Bedford. We grew up, I lived next door actually to our family home here on Purchase Street. And we lost our family home and now we rent. And we're fortunate to rent from a family friend. And so she's very fair and equitable landlord. But that is a very unique situation in New Bedford. That is not always the case here in New Bedford. So for me, I always spoke about how these are lived experiences for myself and so many people here in New Bedford. And that's what we set out to do when we announced our campaign, was to bring a light to these many concerns that people are facing in New Bedford.
Wow, there's so much there. Shane, talk a little bit about what it must have been like to lose your parents so young and what you think are some of the services that could help people who are in similar situations nowadays.
Yeah, so, for me, it's one of those things. When I was younger, there was, and I still think today, there's a huge stigma, not only around drug addiction, but as I mentioned, my parents passed away from HIV/AIDS. Technically, that wasn't their cause of death, but a weakened immune system caused by the age, and intravenous drug use. So when I was younger, obviously, because I was a child, and because of the stigma around it, I was actually told, for example, my mother died of cancer. And it wasn't until I was older that I was finally told the truth. And so I was like, oh, okay, it wasn't cancer after all. And I think that was what was hard for me was, all this time I kept thinking, oh, well, it wasn't the drugs that got her, it was cancer. So it didn't matter. But then it turned out it was the drugs that ended up killing her. It wasn't just some random cancer. But I think, for me, it's, when I look at even today, I'm wearing, one of the bracelets I have on is about the overdose awareness day. Although my parents didn't die due to an overdose, so many other people do. And I think it's surrounded by the stigma that we still have here in Massachusetts. I'm glad there is a campaign here in Massachusetts to stop the stigma, because I think that contributes a lot to the deaths that we see here. People are less likely to seek the help or resources that we have here in Massachusetts, because they feel as though they're going to be judged, or criticized or called names, felt because they already feel as though they're less than, or that they're not worthy to seek treatment. One thing I always mentioned is that we do have an abundance of resources here, not only in New Bedford, but in Massachusetts. But the issue that we have is accessibility. So, my focus when we're talking about the opioid crisis isn't just about, whether we have enough treatment centers, which was a big topic back in 2019, where we put treatment centers. But it's not just about treatment centers and support groups, which are all very important. But we have to look at other causes. We have to look at preventative care. So our education system, vocational training, job training. And again, what I circle back to every time is housing. If you don't have a reliable place to lay your head at night, how can you be a successful, self-sufficient adult, and be able to operate in the world? So everything comes back to housing, housing, housing.
And it seems like housing has just gotten exponentially worse in the last few years, because of gentrification, because of a very hot real estate market. Both
Mhm.
rents and mortgages have gone way up. Do you have any ideas about things you'd like to see to address that?
Yeah, I think we need more development. I think we need to look at our zoning. I'm in the works of meeting with some people that actually have studied our zoning maps here in New Bedford. I want to do more when it comes to our zoning, because we need to look at our mixed use properties. We need to look at development here in New Bedford for housing, because I think one of the other big issues is supply and demand. When we're talking about apartments where people are going and you have 200 plus people applying for the same apartment, that's why the landlord's able to say, okay, I need first, last security, I need a pint of blood, and I need your credit score to be this, and all these outrageous things that we might not have originally asked for, but now they're able to be very selective. So yeah, I think our inventory of housing, we have a lot of abandoned properties here in New Bedford that we could be fixing up. There's a lot of city-owned properties or bank-owned properties that we can be revitalizing, that we can be utilizing. But it comes back to a zoning issue that, like I said, I want to be studying our zoning, and I'm in the works of looking at that now on how we can reutilize, or I don't know if that's the word I want to use, but restructure our zoning for not only our businesses, but our housing as well.
And this all connects to the issue of gentrification. As we know, there are some interesting things going on. I know at Tufts University, Dana Ribeiro has been taking courses and learning about some of the ways they've addressed gentrification in Boston, in the Roxbury neighborhood and other neighborhoods, through community groups up there. Is that something that you're interested in?
Oh, definitely. And Dana Ribeiro, my former Ward 4 city councilor, has been an amazing resource. And she's one of the people I'm hoping is going to be an asset for me in this new role. She surely helped me out even during the campaign trail, helping me get started, and in getting me connected with this person that I want to start connecting with about the zoning issues that we have here in New Bedford, and with housing. So yeah, she's definitely someone I hope to be working with in step on this issue.
I have to say, I'm so impressed about your forthrightness about your parents' situation and the issue of the stigma that you talked about, where some people, it's the issue people don't want to talk about, and they don't want to acknowledge that it's in their own families, whatever kind of substance abuse you may have. Most of us are familiar with it. I wonder, do you think that that issue connects to the NIMBY issues we sometimes see, where people don't want a substance abuse treatment center located any place except for perhaps a commercial street or an industrial neighborhood, as we have some on the waterfront?
Mhm.
Is that an issue for you?
Yeah, so NIMBY is not in my backyard, reference. That was, I hate that saying, and especially in this particular situation, because when we talk about our opioid crisis or drug addiction or homelessness, it frustrates me, especially living so close to downtown New Bedford. Especially I live across the street from the Cape Verdean American Veterans Hall. And many a nights when I park right across the street, I've seen, people passed out maybe across the street on the steps of the vets, even though they're closed, or even on my own front porch. So when we talk about not in my backyard, that's where the problem is, right on our front porches, in our pocket parks, in our schools. So this is where the issue is. So we can continue pretending that it doesn't exist and ignoring it. And so, back to your reference about me being open, talking about my parents, I think that's how we get rid of the stigma, is when we feel comfortable enough to talk about it and show people that we're not ashamed. It's not something we should, that we should be ashamed of. It's something that we are able to talk about because we need to grow from it and learn from it to then better be able to tackle it and improve it.
During the campaign, you also talked about relationships of young people in the New Bedford Police Department. Some of the candidates stressed they thought that the issue was one of a few bad apples in the police department. And you told a story about even how sometimes well-meaning officers may stereotype use of color. And you told the story about your brothers coming home from football practice on Hawthorne Street. What do you think you could say that could help us address this issue of mistrust between local youth and the police department, some local youth?
Yeah, so I think we definitely have come a long way. So it was my older brother, the story that I shared about him coming home and being the meet and greet, or stop and frisk is really the term, on the way coming down from Hawthorne. It was my older brother and his friend. And luckily enough, it was a parent that was also coming, that happened to pick up one of their child that happened to be passing by, that saw, hey, what the hell are you doing? That was able to, validate that, hey, these are good kids. They're just coming from this dinner. They're good, and was able to validate them. But yeah, I think the relationships over the years have, built up between, especially when we have things like National Night Out, better community policing, or even like I had mentioned, like I'm the youngest of my brothers, and I haven't experienced that profiling, which I'm very fortunate to, I haven't. But that's how this conversation came up, because I had spoken with them to say, oh, this doesn't happen to me. But I think that's one of the things we have to unlearn, is that just because we haven't experienced it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And I think that's the hardest thing that for people, is they in their mindset, if they don't see it, they don't believe it, essentially. So that was what was interesting with the We Are the Prey report, which is what sparked this kind of conversation that we were having during the forum, was that it was testimony from some children, youth that we have in our schools, saying that they felt that they are the prey. That's where the name of the report came from. So we do need to do more work. I think there's programs like the New Bedford Shannon Outreach that is partnered with the New Bedford Police Department. So they are doing the work. So I want to give them that credit. I know oftentimes during the campaign trail, I've been painted as, anti-police. And I feel in a way it's harmful. I feel like it's a tactic to try to hurt me in a way, because I want to be very clear that I'm not anti-police. I believe that police are very essential to the fabric of a community. For myself, the family home that I referenced that I used to live in when I was younger was broken into, and the first people I called were the police. So, they are important people, and especially in a crisis. But I understand that at times mistakes are made. No one is perfect, which is what was mentioned. There are a few bad apples, but my concern is not with one individual police officer making a mistake. My concern is with the policies that are in place that allow that one police officer to step out of line, and what we're doing to make sure that they're held accountable. So that's what my focus will be around as a city councilor. It's not about, bashing our police officers. We see that on the national level where we talk about defunding the police, and, I think the term is ACAB, which, excuse my language, stands for all cops are bastards. I don't, resort to that kind of language because I have so much respect for our public safety officers. But I just think it's important that we understand that accountability is for everybody, not just for our citizens, but for our police officers. I had mentioned previously that the police motto is protect and serve. And who is that protect and serve for? It's for the community, the service to our community. So that's why when the question came up about civilian review boards, I was in favor of civilian review boards because of the fact that I feel as though if you're protecting and serving us, we should have an element where we're able to review any misconduct, because we can't just have a situation where police are reviewing their self, police are investigating themselves. There has to be a civilian element to make sure that all parties are held accountable.
Besides the civilian review boards, are there any other reforms that you've thought about that you'd like to see discussed or passed?
Well, again, like I said, they've already been doing a lot of the work. I've been a part of United Interfaith Action, and we did a lot of work around police reform in the past. Well, not this summer, but the previous summer when there was the Black Lives Matter protest. We met with Chief Cordero at the time. Now, obviously, it's Chief Oliveira, but at the time it was Chief Cordero. And they have recently changed the gang point system. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but the point system, if you're familiar with what I'm saying, the point system, how they determine whether or not you're a gang affiliated person. So originally you were never notified whether or not you were on the list. And then the point system, it was very easy to get on the list. So even for me, for example, if I took a picture with someone that maybe I went to high school with, and I, saw them one day and I took a picture with them, and that I could have got X amount of points for having been in a picture with them. So things like that, they reformed that system, which I haven't seen the new update. I don't know if they've released that yet. I know there was an article that just came out about it, but systems like that are already changing, which are very important. And I believe they're starting a whole new slate. And that was a huge step, I think, in terms of justice for people of New Bedford, because how can you expect somebody in our community, if they're trying to live a regular life, if they're being marked as a gang member, if they're not even a gang member, and they don't even know they're on this list. So now the system will notify you if you do end up on the list. Now there's actual ways to remediate if you do end up on the list, how you can get yourself off the list, because before there wasn't a system that way. So I'm glad to see that there are receptive to change. Another option, I believe it was the meet and greet policy that I mentioned, which is just another fancy term for stop and frisk. Chief Cordero had stopped that as well. So I was happy to see that come to an end. Those are just a couple of the things that I'm thinking of now off the top of my head that I was glad to see that we were pushing for. And I'm sure there will be more things, but this is why I ran. And what I will continue to do is push the narrative, continue to uplift the community groups that are already doing the work in our communities. And I think that's what's essential. At the forums that you attended, Linda Morad, Councilor Morad had pointed out multiple times that there's only so much a city councilor can do legislatively, and she's right. However, we have a platform to lift our voices or use our voices to lift up other voices. And that's the role that I see as myself as a city councilor. I don't want to be a city councilor where I'm just approving a budget and pushing paper essentially. I want to be able to be lifting up my community and showing our youth especially that we have power in number, because we want to move from protesting to power to policy.
I once had it described to me that in some New Bedford neighborhoods, everyone lives so close together that people go to school together, they play in the neighborhood when they're growing up, and they may know people who are in gangs, but they are not in the gangs themselves. They may sometimes, be talking to them or have their picture taken, but the line is not as firm as they would like to make it sometimes, and there's perhaps not enough understanding of the way the neighborhood actually works.
Yeah, and and it just makes me think about how blessed I am, because growing up here in New Bedford Ward 4, the schools that I've gone to, different kids that I grew up with did not have the same story, I should say, that I have now, where I'm a city councilor. So it was, the day I won was a very emotional day for me. Because again, like I said, I didn't set out to win. I set out to change the message, to change the narrative of what a city councilor is or what a city councilor can do. And we wanted to get a more progressive voice out there for New Bedford, to show people that we're better than this. And I felt that we achieved that goal. So even before election day came, I said, hey, win or lose, we achieved that goal. But for me, I think what was, really hard was, letting other, for me, I mentioned, I'm Shane Burgo and the stuff that I've gone through. I know that there are other Shane Burgos out there that are coming up behind me. And for me, I kept saying to myself, well, what message are we sending to them that are coming up this way? I want them to know that they too can be a city councilor, just because of where they're coming from. I was speaking with Councilor Baptiste, who was also reelected and also won his first time 2 years ago. And I was saying to him, one of the backhanded compliments that I always seem to get, that I always take offense to sometimes, is when I see people from when I was a child, usually adults, and they say stuff like, oh, it's so great to see how you turned out. Or they say something along the lines of, oh, my brothers and I, oh, all you boys turned out so well. And it's almost as though, the other part that they're not saying is, we didn't expect you to turn out so well because of who our parents were, because of the background we came from. And like I said, our story is not a unique story. So I think about that for the other youth of New Bedford that grew up the same time I did, that might have gone down a different path, that might not have had the same support that I had from my family, from my church community. So, when I had mentioned I won, I told people I didn't win. My community won. The people that had been lifting me up all these years, I did not do this alone, and I truly mean that, because, I'm getting a little emotional now just talking about it, because if only you knew how far we've come to get to this point. I honestly have never believed I would ever get to this point where I would be, excuse me, I'm sorry, but it was so powerful for me, because there were times when I was younger that I always wondered, would it get better? Is there more out there for us? And for me, like me and my brothers, like I said, I was the youngest of four boys. So I was used to getting hand-me-downs, and we used to share a 1-bedroom, all 4 of us in 1 bedroom. And again, this is not a unique story in New Bedford. So on that day when Manny DeBrito said, Shane Alston Burgo in the 5th position, and just knowing how powerful of a voice I can have in this community for not only myself, but for so many other people in New Bedford that I know share the same story. and so many other people that I know have the same mission of empowering our youth. In the work that I do at the DTA of empowering low income individuals to self-sufficiency. That's why I do the work that I do in our community. And I keep talking about meeting people where they are because I know how hard it is. So that's why, for me, I mentioned it's personal for me because I know it's personal for so many other people in New Bedford. Um, and that's why at the same time, it's very scary for me because I feel like I have so much to lose because I don't want to let people down. And I feel like for anybody else, it might be, whatever, I might be bad as a city councilor. But for me, I feel like I have to be good at this because if I mess this up, I think about all the people coming up behind me that I don't want to disappoint or don't want to mess up for them when they decide to finally run.
Well, I can tell that you're not going to mess this up. I remember when I first interviewed you, I talked to you about it takes money to raise to do this, and I
Mhm.
talked to you about campaigning is hard work. It takes a long time to get your name out there. And I remember of all the candidates I interviewed in the beginning of this race, you were very straightforward. You acknowledged, I understand I have to raise some money. I understand it's going to be a lot of work to get my name out there to people who don't know me, but you never seemed like you didn't think it was worth trying, that you took it
Mhm.
seriously and you were going to try the best you could, and you did, and people were impressed, and your campaign just took off. So people express confidence in you because they like you. They like the things that you were saying. So I think you can take pride in that. Before we wrap up, I just want to go back to something you started off talking about, and that was government services and transparency, things that are
Yes.
important to you. Can you talk a little bit about those topics and what you want to say?
Yeah. So one of the things when we were setting out, when we were door knocking, meeting with people, and even what I was talking about when I said we have an abundance of resources here in New Bedford, but the issue is about accessibility. Even when we're talking about housing. So when we have community block grants or the Community Preservation Act, things like that, that people, homeowners especially, don't realize that they can apply for these community block grants to help fix up, especially their multi-level homes and things like that, to improve their properties, especially if they're renting out to residents here. If they're excuse me, what's the uh, owner occupied properties. We want to be able to help them stay here in New Bedford. So I want to be able to be a resource to our owner occupied residents so that they stay here in New Bedford, don't sell their properties out to outsiders who are just going to come in, jack up the rent and things like that. So uh, speaking with people when we were door knocking, they don't know how to navigate City Hall. So today, actually, Councilor Abreu had taken me around City Hall, introduced me to all the different department heads that I will be working with when it comes to constituent services and working as a city councilor. I have a whole bunch of business cards with all their contacts, so that's good to have. But so even for myself, learning now to navigate through all of them as a city councilor now, once I get my email established, but I want to be able to uh, again, accessibility is going to be key for so many of our residents that don't know, okay, well, who do I go to for this? Or what do I do for that? So that was why I wanted to highlight it as one of our campaign priorities, because literally every person we talked to, depending on what ward you go to, everyone had a different issue. Oh, our roads, our taxes, our housing, you know, different big ticket issues. I'll say they had different big ticket issues, but all the little issues were the same, which was constituent services and government transparency. What's going on at City Hall? Who handles this? What department does that? So I think one of the other things we're planning on doing, and I think because I'm younger and social media is a big tool for our youth, I want to utilize social media to educate our younger people about our government agencies. Like, oh, this is the zoning board, this is what they do, this is the planning board, this is what they do. So that way they have a better understanding of what they might need to do, especially if they decide to start a business. Here's the people that you're going to need when you decide to start your own business. Or, oh, you own a home now, here's the different departments you might need at City Hall if you're going to do this, or you're getting married, congratulations, here's the places you're going to have to go when you get married, the clerk's office, or other options that you might need to go throughout a City Hall. But I don't think people realize how much our city government handles when it comes to our local operations. Everyone always sensationalizes our state and national politics, but it's really our local level government that handles pretty much every aspect of our lives. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to shed a light on all of the hard work that our city employees do, which is why when it comes time to budget, that's one of the big things you'll hear. You heard and will continue to hear from candidates is, we're going to cut the budget, we're going to slash the budget, cut. And you didn't hear that from me, which I got really nervous about. The Standard Times had printed something where it said, "Oh, Burgo didn't want to cut the budget," and I didn't say that. What I was, trying to get across was, oftentimes it's sexy to say, "Oh, we're going to cut the budget because we're going to go through with a fine-tooth comb and cut out every wasteful spending." But I think what people fail to realize is that when we're cutting a budget, we're cutting city services, we're cutting someone's job. And those city services are what benefits you as a taxpayer. And sure, we might cut that budget and save what sounds like a lot of money, but when it comes down to percentages, it's not a lot of money. And you're still going to pay a lot of taxes for even less services now. So my focus is not going to be necessarily around cutting the budget. It's going to be around, how do we get more revenue in? How do we, get more economic development here in New Bedford? That's what the focus needs to be around, not about slashing budgets, cutting vacant positions that, we're going to end up having to fill later on because we don't have enough employees to plow the streets, or, look at what happened with all the damages with the trees. Our DPI, our Department of Public Infrastructure, does so much great work in our city. Everything that you see and don't see underneath the ground, our DPI handles. And so imagine when it comes budget time and they have a bunch of vacant positions and the city council says, "Oh, well, let's slash it, let's cut it," because they're vacant right now. They're vacant right now because it takes a while to hire people. So I think that's important for people to understand. So when it comes, again, sorry, to circle back to government transparency, when I make a vote to approve a budget or not approve a budget, or to cut a budget or not cut a budget, I will be completely transparent. This is my promise to our residents, that I will be releasing a statement explaining my position. And when I do get my business cards, I plan to hand them out like candy to everybody, because again, accessibility is going to be my new middle name. Shane A. Burgo will be Shane Accessibility Burgo, because I want to be accessible. And so if you don't if you don't agree with me on an issue, call me about it. Let's discuss it. Because I think that's what's important when it comes to our local leaders is our local government should be the most accessible out of all governments. And that's our plan. So when it comes to constituent services and government transparency, it might have been last on my door hanger, but it's first and foremost in my heart.
Well, congratulations again, Shane. I don't think you have to apologize for being a progressive voice. That may have been to your advantage in the at-large race, as I said in my column, with so many conservative candidates. But I think a lot of people are in admiration of the fact that in 2019, you saw the city council race. You didn't think the issue of opioid addiction was being discussed enough. You brought that addiction issue to the fore this time, and people took notice of it, even when there was less attention being paid because of the pandemic. So I think a lot of folks are going to be happy to have your voice on the council.
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
Thanks very much for talking to the New Bedford Light, Shane.
Thank you.